Okay, there we go. Let me just get my presentation. I had to reboot, of course, at the perfect time.
Maybe you have to play the Jeopardy song in the background.
All right. Okay, so do we have all of our panelists? Great. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen in a minute here, and we're going to kind of take you through our panel discussion. Just waiting for this to open. Well, I'll start with kind of a quick introduction. So my name is Farah Ahmad. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Strategicon Pharma, and we are developing the product Clinical Maestro that is for business operations. We did have our CEO speaking before Anka. So while I get this set up, I would love to start it off just by simply introducing my fellow panelists. There will be 6 panelists on the phone, and I will go ahead and maybe start with Charlotte. Would you like to begin with your brief introduction?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm a clinical oncologist by training. Actually a teaching professor in both radiation oncology as well as medical oncology. And I'm here in the panel, I think, talking about innovation, not only in clinical practice as well as in clinical trials. That's short enough, right?
Perfect, perfect. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to probably come back to a couple of intro slides now that I'm all set up. Okay, we're going to go to Audrey. Would you like to introduce yourself, Audrey? Do we have Audrey on?
She is on, but I think she is currently muted.
Okay.
Ah, here we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm Audrey Rossow. I work at Pulmatrix, which is in Lexington, Massachusetts, not far from Boston. And we are a pulmonary focused company. And I'm really looking forward to discussing the topics on this panel. So thank you for having me.
Great, thanks Audrey. And over to Rachel.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm a senior clinical trial manager at a immuno-oncology focused company, but I have extensive experience both with a small pharma as well as some of the larger pharma, and a lot of interesting experiences with how you can integrate technology to help expedite your trial.
Thank you, Rachel. And Maria.
Hi, everyone. My name's Maria Corvez. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm the head of clinical operations for Fosun Pharmaceuticals with our office here, soon to be opening in Lexington, Massachusetts. I have over 23 years of experience in the clinical study management fields on the academic, sponsor, and pharmaceutical biotech world. And I'm looking forward to this discussion specifically of how the situation with COVID-19 will impact some of our trials in oncology and non-oncology trials that I'll be discussing with Farah, and what innovative ways we've been using with my colleagues. Thank you, Farah.
Thanks, Maria. And David. Go ahead, David. Do we have David?
Yes,
oh,
I think, yeah, I don't know if I got the light.
There he is. There he is.
It's great. David Jackson. I'm a physician by training. I work for a company called Lundbeck Pharmaceuticals, and we're focused on improving the quality of life for people with brain diseases. I'm a clinical neurologist for them, and I work mainly early phase. I've done late phase for US Medical, but I'm also a global early phase lead for Lundbeck, and glad to be here.
Great, thank you, David. And we do have Jack as well.
Greetings, everyone. This is Jack Snyder. I am a physician and scientist by training. For the last decade, I have been a managing director for the Washington office out of Rockville, Maryland for a global clinical research organization, formerly known as Cato Research, now known as Cato SMS Research. I'm very happy to be part of this panel today and looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Well, I am going to back it up a little bit because I missed the introduction and I would like to kind of frame this up. So the topic today is the future of clinical trials, how to attain precision in clinical trials execution by adopting innovative technologies. When I look at this title, the word that sticks out to me is actually the word adopting. And being in technology, I understand and very, very closely, and I'm sure you all do as well, that adoption is actually kind of the last step in the journey of bringing in technology. So firstly, I think what's important is to establish your own set of requirements. Secondly, you have to have an awareness of what is available on the market. And then you need to do an exploration in relation with your requirements and assessment of the various options that you might have, various different vendor tools that might be out there. Then you would be kind of moving into actually getting that approved internally at your organization, you know, gating stakeholder approval, and moving into an implementation phase, and then finally getting to adoption and change management. So we will touch upon those steps later in the talk. But I wanted to just share a few thoughts. So firstly, just to frame it up, we do all know that clinical trials are quite complex. There are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of different stakeholders. There are a lot of different groups that you need to coordinate, sequence of time, and understanding how to take decisions really quickly at times and slowly at other times. And we like to kind of think about it as orchestrating a symphony. There's a lot that goes into it. So I think we can all relate with this next image. It's hard work, right? There's a lot of things going on together in parallel. And how can we actually utilize technologies that are available in the market to help us rebalance? So there are numerous things we can do to achieve our goals with technology, and that can be done by maybe it could be a lower cost, or it could be a faster, greater speed to execute certain tasks, more efficiency, less effort, more accuracy and precision. So we are going to touch upon some of these items during the talk today. We are going to start with some audience poll questions. So Sam, I hope you can bring up question number 1. We are going to do it a little bit differently today. We are going to ask you guys to please vote on these questions, and we are going to only reveal the answers towards the end. So you do need to stay right through to the end of the session to learn about what your colleagues think. So the first question, are you currently considering implementing new technologies in your clinical trial processes? Yes or no? Let's take a few seconds there. I'll let everybody kind of pick their poll response.
Do the panelists get to participate?
I got a little pop-up. I'm not sure if you got it, Jack.
I got it as well.
Yeah,
okay.
If would you like us to participate?
I would love for you to participate.
I participated.
Yes,
okay.
I've already clicked.
Okay, Sam, can we move on? Is that enough time, you think?
Sure.
Okay. Question number 2. Do you believe the COVID-19 pandemic has positively influenced the clinical trial industry's willingness to embrace new technologies? Yes or no? Give you a moment to answer that one. Okay, very exciting. We will move to the third question, which requires a bit more effort on the audience's part. This is a multiple choice question. So in your opinion, why is the clinical trial industry so slow to adopt new technology solutions? So please select all that apply. And can you select multiple? Yes, you can. So please go ahead and select all that apply. Okay, we will go ahead and get started with the questions to the panel at this point. So I'm going to now move the questions to the panel. We're going to start with a general question. So to the panel, have you experienced a difference in your organization's orientation towards technology since the pandemic? And what changes have you observed in terms of this openness towards new technology? So we don't want to all speak at once, but if you want to go ahead and jump in, please let's start.
Sure. So why don't I take this since everyone else has been a little quiet. So our company really believes in the face-to-face interaction, communication, in-person conversations, not only within our company, but also with our sites. And so we've done some Webex trainings in terms of for lab processing, because we have one sample that it's not difficult to process, but it is something that requires a little bit of love as you're processing it. And so it's really been more open, a lot more openness to having those Webex, those phone calls, particularly with sites. And I think it's part of it is just trying to do the best that we can and give every opportunity in a pandemic. And some of it's also just being more comfortable with it. One of the challenges, though, I will highlight here is some of the sites are a little bit more resistant because of potential PHI exposure. If you're looking at doing a WebEx in the lab, there may be patient information that's unrelated to your study. So that's been a piece that we've had to work around a little bit.
Interesting.
I would like to add that I am surprised by especially the follow-up visits being done all by telemedicine, and the enthusiasm outside my peer community of using that, being efficient that way, even more efficient than having patients come in for those regular follow-up visitors because they simply live far away from the cancer center. So the whole telemedicine has kind of broken ice, which is, I think, hopefully a persistent evolution there.
Great.
Hi. Oh, sorry.
Maria,
David.
go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, David. Yes, hi, Farah. For us at Fosun, we always believe in patients first and what's best in the patient's interest. So for us, with this pandemic that's currently ongoing, similar to what Rachel mentioned earlier, our organization has been very flexible on looking at new technologies in order to make the patients feel safe, but have the continued option to continue treatment for their diseases, but feel the comfort and safety, you know, and based on determined times for most of us. So before, for most of us, which are clinical operations professionals that have worked in trials, a lot of these new technologies were nice to haves. Yeah. And now we're seeing that we must implement some of these in our trials in order to really contribute successfully to the enrollment of the trials and also ultimately for patient safety purposes. So it's been nice for me, something that was a nice to have years ago. Now the leadership is looking at it very differently.
That's great. I see a lot of people nodding their heads.
So this is Jack. I'll jump in here and say that there's in some ways for our organization and for the organizations that we deal with, and again, I work for a global clinical research organization, there's a sense of inevitability about some of the evolutions here, particularly when it comes to doing things remotely. We are finding, however, that sites and their regulatory as well as their legal counsel are not all of like mind when it comes to privacy issues, when it comes to security issues, when it comes to telemedicine and liability issues. So we're seeing a variety of opinions on these things, and that it remains to be determined over time to what extent that will challenge us as we work with sites and with clinical investigators and those who are counseling them.
Great comments. I'm going to move to the next question because we have a lot of really good questions prepared. So this question is for Charlotte. Given your deep experience in radiation oncology, how has the advancement in imaging technology improved precision in clinical development from a therapeutics perspective?
For me, imaging has two very important components within oncology, and one is response assessment, and the other one is information in the treatment itself, specifically for radiation, right? But not all patients do get radiations. About 50% of oncology patients do get radiation therapy. But what is clear is that imaging has substantially improved not only in quality, but especially in speed over the last decade. And that speed was necessary to use imaging in different moments in time. So in radiation, we were significantly dependent on imaging to know exactly where to treat. And it was always one exercise to do before treatment. Patient had to come in several times to be imaged to know where they're going to be treated. And then the moment of treatment, the speed was not there to verify. And now over the last decade, we have machines being as performant as a normal MRI or CT, and not only monitoring in one moment, but over time. So following respiratory movements, bowel movements, so we can really localize in that movement where we have to go, which make the treatments far more precise. So, and just to give an example, to treat 1 centimeter, we more or less treat a domain of 3 cubical centimeters to be able to treat it all the time. When we use the specific techniques today, that can be reduced to more than 80%. So, and that is not reducing tumor you treat, it is normal tissue. It's lung, it's liver. You do not touch, so you do not damage. So I think that is an important one. But creating all those images over time in the different moments in time also creates a possibility to learn from that. So we do not only use the speed of imaging to look at it, but also to analyze it across patients to know exactly what different areas mean. So you can automate certain gestures of delineation or positioning. You learn across like 1,000 patients before for that specific patient. So all that learning cycles speed up a lot of processes. So when we look at treatment who was done 5 years ago and was an exercise of 7 days, putting in action the start of treatment, we now can envision a patient coming in the clinic and having the preparation as well, the planning and the treatment at the same day. So I think there's a huge step forward by two things, the computing speed of the tools we have, as well as the learning capacity we're now starting really to see. Yeah.
It's amazing. Great answer, Charlotte, thank you. So moving on to Jack. Jack, through your leadership role at Cato SMS, how have advances in imaging diagnostic technologies changed the way clinical trials are executed from your perspective, and what role has standardization played in this?
So may I share my screen? Just
Sure.
a few brief slides. I promise to go through them very rapidly.
Okay, do I stop here? Okay. Go ahead, Jack.
So just very briefly, let's understand that imaging has now interfaced with clinical trials in so many ways, whether it be the pre-trial initiation phases or the enrollment and follow-up stages or the closeout. We can't go into detail here. I just want to indicate to you that imaging really has permeated many aspects of clinical trials. And what we've learned very importantly is some of the values added. These are just a few of them. There's more objectivity now, and that includes the use of imaging as for not only primary, but some very unique endpoints. We have a lot more customization that is possible now. It used to be that imaging was rather an afterthought in the development of clinical trial protocols, what have you. I think that is changing for a host of reasons. There's a broader scope of validation, not only for the images themselves, but for the readers, although there's still some issues there. And of course, we have more sophistication, and that means, among other things, generating protocol-specific algorithms. What I think that we want from our imaging partners, because for most of us, we're partnering with those who are sophisticated in this arena. We want them to know how to run their part of the study. We want them to know how to tailor their tools. We want some flexibility from them. We want them to be able to help articulate, or perhaps themselves lead the articulation of what the workflow looks like. And above all, we still have this really delicate balancing between the costs of our readers versus the cost of everything else. Some of you may be aware of that. What I want to make sure everybody is aware of is the FDA's approach to this, as well as some recent consensus documents, because one of the major issues is the standardization of imaging in clinical research. And we know this summarizes in one slide, trying to summarize a 40-page FDA guidance document. But basically, it comes down to data have got to be accurate and reproducible and unbiased. We're now evolving and understanding and implementing, in many situations, a critical role for the charter, for the audit process, for the quality. What's become very important and challenging is and time consuming is the qualification of study site equipment and the personnel. The FDA is pushing for centralized imaging interpretation, for blinded review, for they would like to see more standardization in terms of the frequency with which images are acquired, as well as the timing of when those images are interpreted. And of course, we are now evolving imaging interpretation standards, whether they be imaging protocol standards, imaging data standards, or imaging reader standards. And importantly, we actually have some guidance from a December 2017 White House report. So some of you may be aware of this White House report, but imaging and imaging standardization is so important that in December 2017, the Working Group on Medical Imaging and the National Science and Technology Council put out this document. I won't go through these. These are just some of the figures and the comparisons that are made, but what you should know about this White House roadmap, as they call it, is they made 12 fundamental recommendations about the future of imaging in clinical research. And they're just listed here. This is all public domain, so I can provide it to anybody that wants it. But you can see that one section was 3 recommendations on image acquisition. Another 3 were on applying machine learning and AI to imaging. And I understand there were just presentations on that earlier in the day. There's the acceleration of developing and translating these various new techniques. And then, of course, there's the whole issue of best practices. So this is the White House back, and this is many, many people from many parts of the imaging world and the clinical research world coming together. And then last but not least here, I want you to be aware of some initiatives on the technology front here. We have, believe it or not, the Koreans have published very recently the first example of a clinical trial management system that focuses on images. And they published this in late 2019, Clinical Trial Imaging Management System. So we like to call it the CTMS. Well, now we have the CTIMS. So I would be remiss if I didn't present this as some very interesting work coming out of Korea that's published in the medical informatics imaging literature. And then last, we have 2 consensus activities that have just occurred within the last year or so. One published in the Journal of Thoracic Oncology, the other published in Neuro-Oncology. And these are basically groups of people coming together and basically publishing what they call detailed multidisciplinary consensus imaging and management guidelines in the setting of clinical trial enrollment. And this one has to do basically with mesothelioma patients in clinical trials. And lastly, we have a document now that's just within the last few weeks coming out on consensus recommendations for standardized brain tumor imaging protocol. So that's basically what the landscape is currently for imaging, and where you can tell from these this set of information where it's headed. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Jack, for that great detailed response and for sharing some further information. Great, let's kind of move on back to the COVID topic. So COVID-19 has created trial continuity challenges due to the risk to patient safety. I think we spoke about this at length in various different talks. And we know that this is especially true for immune compromised and other vulnerable patient populations. Audrey, your organization is focused on pulmonary diseases, and Maria, your organization is focused on pulmonary fibrosis. What technologies have you vetted and adopted to help decentralize your trials and protect patient safety? Let's start with Audrey.
I'll start first. To be blunt, we haven't adopted any. We are kind of in a clinical hold, company hold, in terms of understanding the surges in the COVID-19 in the countries that we are operating in. Mm-hmm. And of course, since we're in pulmonary diseases, these patients are already compromised in that way. So, you know, even if things, you know, opened up suddenly, we don't feel comfortable bringing in our patients into clinics when they already have, you know, different pulmonary diseases. So we're kind of in this like holding pattern. Yeah. I feel like I'm flying over an airport and just waiting and waiting and waiting. But that's the right thing to do because, you know, we just can't, you know, we can't open up our, I mean, even our clinics are opened up. Mm-hmm. We can't, we don't feel comfortable, I should say, bringing in our patients into clinical trials because we are in respiratory diseases. Yep. So they're already compromised, whether it's asthma, ABPA, you know, COPD. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that may change in the future, but right now we're kind of in a holding pattern. And okay. So I have not adopted any technologies yet, but I hope to as soon as we have a path forward.
Yeah, it makes total sense. So you're definitely you're not enrolling at this time in those trials for patient safety.
No, okay. Right, exactly.
Great. Maria, would you like to chime in on that?
Yes, hi everybody. Yeah, so I'm sure that the folks now with the whole pandemic and COVID-19 have heard of IPF, which is idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, which is one of the therapeutic indications my organization, FOSUN, is focusing on. And basically, it's a very serious, rare, what was considered rare lung disease, where it makes it very hard for patients to breathe. And in the past, patients had very limited options for treatment, which were either steroids, immunosuppressants, antifibrotics, but we're looking at new therapies, and that's what my team is working on. And so, interestingly enough, before the pandemic breakout, we were designing these trials, and we had submitted our IND to the FDA. And so right now where we are is that we're currently working on the study protocol, and we are gonna be already implementing a hybrid type of patient experience, meaning we will be mixing the home visits, the classic on visits, you know, with the PI and site teams at the clinics, but also implementing the virtual trial technology for use for televisits and also through study applications. You know, I'm sure that that our colleagues have heard of Metodicity and other apps such as Hillrom that just came out earlier last week with remote vital signs monitoring device. Mm-hmm. And so that will really help us, you know, because as my colleague just pointed out, this is a very much immunocompromised, population, similar to the oncology population that we treat. But we're, I think, taking that pioneering step of, again, how do we design a hybrid trial so that we can provide these patients the option to have a treatment, but also make them comfortable through the use of televisits, through the use of the apps. Again, going back to what I said earlier, in my career, we were using these fancy, technology for quality of life, e-pros and questionnaires and drug diaries. But now it's nice, and it's something that Dr. Callis mentioned, because recently the guidance changed with the reimbursement based on the pandemic of looking at these remote technologies. And I feel that this is for us a step in clinical research that we can provide, unfortunately during the pandemic, but at least give an option to patients, because again, this is a very, very tough disease for patients living with this. They only have a 5-year life expectancy. So I'm quite excited about that, adopting that.
Yeah, we would love to get an update when you've kind of been deeper into the trial on how it went, Maria.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to move to the next question. So I'm going to direct this question to Rachel. So we've talked about different ways that technology can be applied to achieve advantages. So for example, automation can generate process efficiencies and faster task execution. Aggregation and analytics can reveal new insights by leveraging what we call big data. Digital collaborative technologies can simplify workflows and provide structure to large groups working together. And then, of course, wearables and other online technologies, such as those that Maria kind of referred to, can bring traditionally physical interactions into a remote reality. So Rachel, your organization's product is administered in sequence with a very expensive commercially available oncology drug. And you recently implemented a pretty transformative technology solution, as we understand it, to eliminate wasted drug. So we'd love to have you share a little bit about that solution, and what do you think the key success factors were in that undertaking?
Absolutely. So as the team, as we're talking about this, one of the products in our combination is $48,000 a dose, which I'm sure you can imagine as you're working through that drug wastage, which can be quite high on some studies with your traditional paper-based requesting, adds up very quickly. And so we worked with one of the vendors out there with IRT systems to implement an on-demand labeling and really on-demand predictive algorithm to ensure a drug is shipped only once a patient is fully screened and eligible for participation in the study, and as well as ways for ensuring that that shipment is held if the subject is placed on dose hold, or a number of other scenarios depending upon how that patient is doing for whether drugs are shipped or not. I think there are a couple of components here that were really important in the success. One, a strong training at your site initiation visit to highlight at what step the product is shipped, to avoid any of those last minute hurdles where the site thought they did everything that they did and the drug wasn't shipped in time for a cycle 1 day 1. So having a really clear training platform up front. A second piece is we do have a 28-day screening period, or up to 28 days, I should say, but some sites do want to screen patients and then, particularly with COVID-19, dose the next day or shortly thereafter. And so just very clear communication to the sites to say, let us know in advance if you're anticipating a patient to come in and you're not having enough time for us to ship product on demand, because it's a 2 to 4 day turnaround time period, depending upon when the patient is registered. If it's on a Friday afternoon at 5 p.m., of course, the drug won't ship until Monday the following week, but also depending upon the location in the US. And so we've done a lot of communication with the sites around that, but also when coming to our contracts with the sites, working with those sites that are able to build into the contract that will reimburse them for any emergency doses for that product, that if they can source it and store it, that we will reimburse them. So it is a little bit more expensive for that reimbursement process, but it does cover the situation where there's a temperature excursion in transit and you're not able to really address that product. Or and then last but not least, for sites that we're anticipating to be higher enrollers, that we give a small amount of the product for enough for one dose, and then give a secondary dose so that if there is another patient that is screened, that you have that product on hand, and then worst case scenario, that additional product can be then used as the very last dose that the patient would be expected to receive should no other patients enroll. So building in a little bit of success there.
Great.
This is Jack. I'd like to ask you a question in these regards. Are you, when it comes to product delivery here and just moving things around, has anybody seen any issues with pharmacies and any requirements they have, or in any challenges that they may face or problems that they see or may be causing?
So I will say we did have 2 institutions that before their site was willing to consider them fully activated, they did need to have 1 dose on site. So we did work with the team internally to have 1 exception so that they could have that one dose seated in advance to allow them to move forward.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so I just wanted to do a quick time check because I know we started a little bit later, and Victor, you're saying that we do have kind of some more time, right? We're not ending at 4:30 or what?
Absolutely, Farah. You can take like 5 to 10 minutes more.
Okay. Okay, so great. We'll keep going in that case.
No problem.
Okay. So next question is for David. So even before the COVID-19 pandemic changed our world, traditional clinical trial participation was already challenging for certain kind of therapy areas and patients. So David, in your experience as a neurologist working on brain health, how has digital medicine and virtual clinical trials improved clinical research for Parkinson's, epilepsy, and Alzheimer's? Oh, David, I don't hear you. Let's just check your mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Hello?
can now hear you.
Okay, great. I'd just like to go back 6 years, and I split the time up between pre-2017 and post-2017. 2017, pre-2017, there was this notion in the clinical development ecosystem of a 100% end-to-end virtual trial, but at that point it was almost, the thought was that even possible to pull off? And then you had several things happen that pre-2017. You had a report that came out from the National Institute of Health that said that if you just adopted a mobile technology, electronic data capture, you would save 30% reduction in cycle time, 10% per cost in each phase of your process. And so what happened post 2017, we had the first company called Science 37 that delivered an end-to-end virtual decentralized clinical trial. On top of that, you had other vendors like Apple Research, which had developed this Empower app that signed up the largest Parkinson patient study in history with 10,000 patients, and with 93% of those patients never participated in the study before. So the explosion from 2017, part of that was obviously a lot of organizations was adopting translational medicine into their thoughts in how quickly can we get it from the bench side to the bedside to our patients. And you just seen this explosion after 2017. So you had companies like Parallel 6 that does a patient enrollment engagement management system. You have ClinPal, who's the end-to-end research platform for virtual hybrid direct-to-patient studies. And so with those things happening, you start to see the growth. And then obviously COVID has driven a lot of it this year. And for us as the organization at Lundbeck, we have headed on the plate to start looking at a lot of different technologies, but this quarter, we just implemented what we call the digital agile lab, where we pulling together teams from across the organization. And as Jack mentioned, sometimes these organizations are so big, you have a company within a company. It's so very difficult to move things. And so we created this team that's from different parts of the organization to test and validate end-to-end processes that allow us to move toward that virtual clinical decentralized trial, especially when we're dealing with Alzheimer's patients and Parkinson's, when they have caregivers and they'd rather be in their homes than be in a clinical site. And so we've seen tremendous since 2017, and then it has to be, you're seeing more from a top-down approach from some of the organizations that's driving it, and that's what's really needed to really move it forward even further. And that's what you're starting to see with these type of platforms that appear, these cross-industry consortiums where we're talking about best practices. FDA regulations are starting to ease with the COVID-19, but prior to that, you started to see the ease in a lot of the regulations. So I think we're on the right track to get there. I think what some of my colleagues across the industry that I've spoken with is that their challenges, a lot of the immature data infrastructures and data analytics that causes that hurdle for them so big to get to. And then some companies are too small where the one person in clinical development is your data manager, your biostats and everything else, and it makes it difficult. So those are been some of the challenges with it, but I see the progressive movement, and especially in the neurology space where you have a lot of late phase failure, you really need to get in and quickly and then have a go, no go in your early phases to be able to have that reduction in cycle time and fill that pipeline with therapeutic modalities that's going to help our patients.
So are you expecting to see more kind of virtual trial providers emerge, or kind of more entrants from other industries kind of get into that space?
What I've seen, and again, Science 37 just had my senior vice president on, he spoke. So I think what you're starting to see with COVID is really driving it at this point. And I would suspect with the easing of the federal regulations, so that's a big part of it. You're going to see more that's coming about, and there's going to be more pressure from the sponsor for the CRO to be able to provide those opportunities. So you'll start to see that, at least from what we're doing in-house, is that we're starting to push more toward the CRO and the individual sites. What are you doing to help decentralize, to speed this process up, reduce the cycle time? And once you get that pressure from the sponsor, you'll start to see more and more of these organizations push forward. But it still has a ways to go, because you got the internal culture that's used to the old system versus the new, and Jack mentioned that before. And so you have a lot of things to overcome, but that's why one of the reasons why we created that digital lab internally, to create an organization where we can test and validate those different systems that's out there, to see where we can benefit from. And maybe it's not a full end-to-end because of the type of patient population, but we're really pushing toward that.
Well, I love that approach. I love that there is such a thing as a digital lab at Lundbeck that kind of is an impetus to look at technology. So kudos on that. Okay, I'm going to skip to the next question. Let's kind of get to that one. So this one is relates to kind of the administrative tools. So we've discussed throughout the course of today many on-study technology solutions that improve the ability of a trial to produce results through improved patient or investigator convenience, better recruitment retention, site engagement, fewer FTEs, faster decision making. So I would like to shift a little bit the conversation towards technology applications and more of the peripheral areas supporting something like business operations. So we talked about budgeting or study modeling, outsourcing procurement, vendor management, payment solutions, invoice reconciliations, all of those kind of very heavy, manually intensive areas today where there are some interesting providers that have emerged. So would you agree that there has been some impressive advances in this tool set, and how does that actually impact clinical trial precision? So this is an open question to the panel.
I would.
Oh, now we go to the same time. Go ahead, David.
Well, I think it leads me back to, you know, a lot of the, again, I'm speaking from my informal study with about 20 or 30 of my colleagues from different industries, from different therapeutic areas, that the immature data infrastructure and data analytics is the heavy lifting, being able to move documents from one system to another between the CRO. So all of that back of the house heavy lifting is the process where we discussed as a group that's where the biggest hurdle, if you can get start building that data infrastructure and data analytics, it allows you to bolt on these other processes to speed up and reduce cycle time and speed up your clinical trial process.
Yeah, I'm going to chime in here before we go to Charlotte. I think you had a comment. You know, you mentioned kind of lifting files from one area to another. I think that's a very interesting way of saying it, because I think that's one of the biggest issues we have in a non-digital environment is actually systems that are not seamless and systems that don't speak to each other, requiring a manual intervention. So this is an area that in my role at Clinical Maestro that we really try to address to ensure there is kind of a continuity of information that the system actually matches the natural process, as opposed to your natural process having to adapt to the system. Charlotte, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I would like to add, there was a talk on in rare diseases. So the heavy lifting of organizing your data and coding data analysis is the same for a 5-patient trial as for a 5,000 patient trial, right? So it's difficult to be efficient for like a phase 1, 15 subjects, especially if you sometimes need 20 institutes to get those 15 subjects. The whole work associated or the process is the same as for a 5,000 subject trial. Mm-hmm. So I find it difficult to get less heavy lifting exercise for and a faster track for a few subjects initiative, or because especially phase 1 exercise, and my comment is therefore you cannot translate it to all clinical trials. I think is a big difference between phase 1 or other, and even like the phase 4 we are discussing this morning as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely scale plays a major role in the decision to implement technology. I want to get to the next question because it's definitely close to my heart, and I know there's a lot of providers on the line. So, you know, speaking from my personal experience as a technology provider and past experience as a BD leader on the CRO side, it is often a struggle to get sponsors' attention to consider seriously new solutions. This is especially true now with the pandemic. There are many distractions and shifting priorities. And unfortunately, we've seen that many sponsors don't prioritize change until it becomes urgent or they're in a pickle, so to speak. And that often results in some outcomes that could have been avoided. So the question is, you know, why do you think that is? What can technology service providers and other providers do to engage buyers differently? And what collectively can we do as an industry to drive awareness and timely consideration of impactful solutions?
Hi, Farah. Can I answer that? This is Maria.
Sure.
Okay. So for me, I think it would be very helpful because, you know, and I can speak, you know, for my clinical operations colleagues, because we get a lot of emails, especially, you know, with the pandemic, of different solutions and technology vendors. But it would be nice to have more forums like these to really, for us to understand an overview, and especially me coming from a passion of mine, which is why I do what I do, patient centricity. you know, we've been talking about it for now over 12 plus years. What do we do to make it easier on the patient? You know, and again, it's back to the nice to haves. Finally, they see an opportunity. And for us, it would be very helpful to really have a forum and see the different options that are available. Because somebody like me, you know, I was very new to learning about now the open use of the apps, you know, for the vital signs. And I've been in the industry for 20 plus years and the different options. And it would be nice to hear different imaging, for example, you know, in oncology, what options do we have as a sponsor? What can make our trial a success and really, you know, drive towards the endpoints that the regulatory agencies are looking for? For me, it would be nice to have more forums like these and really educate us clinical research professionals on what options there are, because most of the time when we do hear of the options, it's when the CRO presents to us their third-party vendors. So I would encourage more of these type of educational forums for us in clinical research.
Okay, Victor, that was an action item for you.
This is Jack.
Yeah.
Go
This
ahead,
is Jack. I'll respond to
Sure.
on speaking from the CRO perspective. We have decided that we don't like to let more than 30 days go by without at least 1 hour devoted to hearing from a new technology provider. So we've decided the way that we enhance the communication is if a particular kind of technology or a particular need that we have or that our clients have, if we feel insecure or lack sufficient knowledge about that, we simply we look around, we probe, and we say, come and tell us about yourself. So that's the approach we've taken as a CRO, and it actually has been very helpful to us, to the point where we've partnered at least 3 different times in the last year with a technology vendor that we weren't sure that space had such folks.
I like that approach. So you kind of worked it into your regular schedule, worked learning into your regular schedule. I really like that.
Yes.
And I would just say this real quick, and I agree with Jack and what Maria said as well, is that, and if I was in my younger self, I think we had talked about that before. If I was in my younger self, I would either form or join a cross-industry consortium where you can help advance the industry as a whole in a form where you can learn from the successes, because a lot of times you can't afford a failure. So if you're a smaller organization, you just like, I don't have time because I don't know what the downside to those things are. And if you have these forums like this, cross-industry consortiums where people join and you get to learn about what's happening with those technologies, and you have a roadmap. And when you have that roadmap, it's a lot easier for a smaller organization to take that risk as well as the large ones, because you're seeing you have that partnership that you can develop there. But that's where, and you have more more confidence in that technology, because a lot of times when you get that call from that vendor, you don't know if it's, you know, is it going to be the one, or they have a great salesman, you know, so you fighting through that in your head. And if you have a forum where you can display the successes of that particular technology, it makes it a lot easier to convince leadership at your own organization to move forward with it as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, David, because you know, typically it is confusing, right? There is some level of mixed messaging when you're self-identifying, or you're kind of you know, as a vendor, when you're providing your value proposition. It might mean different things to different people, and it's almost like a map of technology providers in an unbiased way to understand how the various pieces kind of fit together. Would also be a good solution to avoid, you know, all sponsors having to recreate the wheel and go through that the same exploration process. So just some final thoughts. We're getting to the end of the time, and I did want to reveal the poll question responses. Are there any other comments or thoughts around continuing to embrace new technologies post-pandemic, or as David mentioned, tech tips for the younger version of you.
There is a comment from Nancy Sacco, and she says the consortiums around some of these topics exist with Transcelerate, Biocelerate, AVOCA, and for smaller companies, they will waive fees. And it really helps when some of the big companies take on testing and comparing these technologies. That's from Nancy.
Great.
So
anyone else? Yeah, was it Rachel? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll definitely say that I think post-pandemic, we will start we will continue to do as much of the remote monitoring that we can. I mean, one of our sites, because of poor internet connection, one day in monitoring remotely using the home internet connection rather than the hospital internet connection, was able to do triple the work that she had been able to do on site. And so components like that, where you have a clear data to back up either process improvement, time savings, those pieces I certainly think will continue to embrace. But that being said, I do think one of the pieces that will really impact this is whether or not the regulatory agencies will continue to maintain some of that looseness. And I think in terms of the question for a future self, it would just be to build in that flexibility as early as possible, that you're not necessarily required to do it, but that if you have that language in your protocols, in your ICFs for these scenarios, it reduces some of the startup time when you're trying to implement it mid-study.
Great. Did anyone else want to jump in?
So this is Jack. For me, I would tell my younger self, learn how to pivot, learn how to think about pivoting, and learn how to actually weigh the pros and cons of pivoting on a regular basis. Even think about pivoting when it's not necessary, when there's no crisis. Think about concepts of pivoting and ask yourself whether you should or should not be pivoting, even if you're not in crisis mode. That's what I would tell my younger self.
Very wise. And I think that's a good note to end on. Let's see what the audience thought. I'm certainly interested in some of those responses. Sam, do you want to pull them up? Ooh, so yes, almost unequivocally 93% yes in terms of consideration of new technology. And the next one? There we go. Yes, positive influence by COVID-19. So something positive has come out of this pandemic, it seems. And the last one, please, Sam. Okay, so some good variety. I would say that looks like surprisingly, the top item here is the lack of time and resources, followed by the alignment between leadership and operations. And then we have a tie across a few others. So I'd love to kind of take a quick screenshot of this because it is an interesting finding, and hope you found this interesting as well. That is the end of our panel. I'd like to thank all the panelists for your time today. I thought it was a very interesting discussion, and you can get in touch with us at Clinical Maestro if you have any further questions on this panel discussion or anything else we kind of covered today.
Thank you very much, Farah, and thank you to the panelists. I just have a few closing comments, and I want to begin by saying thank you to the Precision team, and with a special thanks to the wizard behind the curtain, Sam Ali. And if you agree that he's done a great job, then please send him a chat thank you and let him know you appreciated it. We went through a lot of different topics today. I thought there was great presentations. We went from artificial intelligence to clinical trial management system to real world studies to virtual trials. And I hope that all of you benefited from the program and learned some things as well. Just a final comment to say that remember, we are all in this together with the COVID-19 pandemic, and I hope that you all be well and stay safe. Sam, I hand it to you, sir.
Yep, so thank you again, John, and thank you everyone. In the future, we will be hosting more virtual summits like these. We do plan to have another one sometime in the summer, and myself, Victor, and our team will keep you updated. And We will keep you updated regarding our hybrid summit that's scheduled for October at the Sheraton Commander Hotel. So yeah, we're excited. We won't let this pandemic stop us from collaborating and networking, most importantly. So yep, thank you again, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll definitely all continue to stay in touch. Thank you again.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.